Okay. Let's start. Jai Radha Kunda Divine Grace. Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Acharya Srila Vedas Thakur Ki Jai, Remnant Say Go Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Purava Nityananda, Shri Lady Gadadha, Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhakta, Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Radha Govardhan Vrinda Ki Govardhan Ki Jai, Govardhan Ki Jai, Vachuram Ki Jai, Radhasami Ki Jai, Malai Ki Jai, Shrimati Vasudevi Ki Jai, Sandaveda Bhakta, Vrinda Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda. All glory is the assembled Lord. All glory is the assembled Lord. All glory is the Shri Guru Gopal Jai. Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Navani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurani Jani Paschatya Deshatari. So first we'd like to welcome all of our friends from New Orleans, and Guni, want to introduce them all? So, because we want to give a warm welcome to these nice devotees who come from New Orleans.
So we have Jack here with us.
The Navy man.
Yeah, Jack's part of the Navy. And we have Bo. Bo's a student at the university. He's also an excellent musician. We have Ali. She's a Sangha yogi, and she's also a community activist. And we have Juanita, and she takes care of a lot of concerns with the New Orleans, including water and urban development.
Wow.
Hare
Nice to
Krishna.
see you, buddy. Okay. And my name is Bir Krishna Goswami. And so, some of you may be questioning why I'm wearing a mask, because I'm trying to protect all of you from me. Because I travel a lot, so I'm concerned with all of you that I don't kill you. So, in a closed space like this.
What way to go?
And you're all, apart from the young people here, the rest of you are pretty old, so. So anyway, and I'm very comfortable actually. To me, it's like part of the body, so. As you hear, I can give class, I can chant, I can do everything with a mask on. You can sleep. No, I don't do that. So, that would be too much. So, all right, so we're going on to the next chapter, okay, so today we're going to talk about how to get detached from the material world. Oh my God, what a topic. So detachment, why should one be detached from the material world? We're not talking about repulsed by anything in the material world, because it's Krishna's energy. So we like the material world. That comes as a shock to all of you. Why do we like it? Because it's Krishna's energy. It has a purpose. The purpose of the material world is to teach us that our real place is to understand our spiritual identity and not be attached to this external earth, water, fire, air, ether thing, Panchamahabhuta, and not be attached to the internal mind, intelligence, and false ego. So that's the purpose of the material. It's school, right? The material world is school, isn't it? So what are you meant to do with school? You're meant to graduate, right? And some people are eternal servants. Eternal students, sorry. Eternal servants we want to be, but eternal students, they just stay in university for the next 200 years. But actually we want to graduate so we can get on to real life. So in the material world, there's different grades. You know, just like you have in school, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. So the animal life, or plant life, or amoeba life, they're really like kindergarten stuff. Amoeba's like kindergarten. And then, then you gradually go up. And then the highest is what?
Human life.
Human. Because the human being actually can discriminate between right and wrong. And we have more of a sense of responsibility. So that's why, like, let's take the Bible. The Bible says you shall have dominion over all creatures, right? Doesn't it say that in the Bible? Of course, many people don't understand that verse, and they think that means you can eat everybody. And many times I'm speaking to people who are followers of the Bible, and they say, but it says in the Bible we can eat meat, because we must have dominion over all the creatures. And I say, the way I answer that is I say that you have dominion over your children, right? So, cook them for dinner. So dominion over someone or something doesn't mean you have a right to abuse them. It means you have a right to care for them and see to their welfare. So that is often misunderstood in the Bible like that. And because each and every living entity and every species of life is gradually working their way up the evolutionary ladder to come to the human form of life, and when they come to the human form of life, that's the graduation class.
Mm.
And then you can get left back too, just like in regular school, right? Someone can get left back out of kindergarten, that's pretty hard. But I know people who, had to spend 2 years, 3 years in 6th grade because they just couldn't learn. And so basically, human life is meant for graduating. So in order to graduate, one needs to be detached from this external shell. I mean, that's one of the purposes of yoga, according to Patanjali, is to control the indriya, the senses. So you're detached, you're not attracted, you're not repulsed, and you just use the body for the purpose for which it's made. Like everything has a particular purpose. For example, you have a car. The car's business is to go somewhere. I mean, not the car, to take you somewhere. And so the body's purpose is to take you somewhere. I mean, if you live, the typical example Prabhupada gives is like the bird in cage example. I think many of you have heard of this before. That someone has a bird, and the bird is in a cage. Of course, it's not very nice to keep a bird in a cage. But anyway, so let's say the person has a bird in a cage, and he just takes care of the cage and neglects the purpose of the cage. The purpose of the cage is, have a place for the bird. And the bird croaks. The bird dies. So the purpose of this body is self-realization. One really has to understand that. And so self-realization means become detached. Detachment, by detachment I mean neutrality. The word in Sanskrit is nirapeksha. Nirapeksha means just neutral. Not being attracted, not being repulsed. Just like use the body for the purpose for which it's made. Not become attached to your car, but use it for the right purpose. That's all. And so, in order to become detached from this world, there's an interesting story in the Bhagavatam which I'd like to relate to you. This is like the introduction I gave you so far. And this is such an interesting story. This is the story, of course, of the Avadhuta Brahman. An Avadhuta Brahman is a spiritualist who just hangs out. And he just doesn't care about anything. He walks around sometimes with clothes, sometimes without clothes. He doesn't really care. That's real neutrality. I'm not advising that for anybody here. That you don't care about what you're wearing. That's a little too much. But it was like that. And so this is a story about an Avadhuta Brahman, and this story was actually told by Krishna too. I mean, it's a story within a story. So you have a discussion between Krishna and Uddhava. They're talking. Uddhava is Krishna's devotee. And they're talking, and Uddhava thinks, I just really want to become detached from this world. Krishna's getting ready to leave the planet because it's time. And there's also the destruction of the Yadav dynasty, and Kali Yuga is coming. What is Kali Yuga? Kali Yuga is the age that we're in right now. It's an age of quarrel. It's described It's really interesting. I was talking to the devotees about this today, how in previous yugas you had really good qualities, but these good qualities diminished over the span of time in the previous yugas. And there's the good, basic qualities: cleanliness, mercifulness, truthfulness, and austerity. The four, sometimes these are depicted as 4 legs of a bull, right? And so, at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, that's the previous yuga, the previous time cycle, you have 3 of these different aspects gone. That's cleanliness, mercifulness, and austerity. And the only remaining aspect is what? Truthfulness, right? And truthfulness is represented by 1 leg of the bull. And the story of the Bhagavatam is quite, picturesque, but it's really intense. Because you have, in the Bhagavatam, you have the story of the bull standing on 1 leg, urinating. And because he's being attacked by Kali, who's the personality of this age. Kali means quarrel. It's Iron Age. And so the bull standing there, and truthfulness is remaining. And it's described in the Bhagavatam that truthfulness is destroyed by lying propaganda. Really interesting. And it just struck me how prominent lying propaganda is. Of course, we find before when Hitler took power, he had his information minister, Goebbels, and he basically just put out a lie enough times that everybody began to believe it, right? And they say, if you say that a lie enough times, that it becomes in people's minds a reality, or not truth, but reality to that particular group of people. And so then you look at today's world, and you see that there's so much lying propaganda. I'm not taking position on any subject matter in this class, don't worry. Not going to get into COVID conspiracies or COVID, yes, no, whatever. That's not the point. But there's so much, you don't know who to trust anymore, right? It's like that, who's right, who's wrong. It's just like very, very confusing. People are very confused, and they're convinced, some people are convinced of, racism or sexism, and some people are against it. Of course, I'm against those things, obviously. But it's just that people are just being brainwashed. And it's interesting, if you study psychology, which I have, there's this branch of psychology which deals with groups of people, or mob psychology, or to be more specific, herd psychology. Now, we have cows here, right? And the cows are in a herd. But what does that mean they're in a herd? That doesn't mean there's just a bunch of cows together. That means they follow the leader, right? One of the cows establishes his or her supremacy over the other ones. How they do it through the horns, I don't know. I've never really talked to one of the cows to discuss how they do it. But, it's the most powerful cow, or the one who can speak the best. Goes on the internet, cow Twitter. So anyway, so the cow, forgive me if I laugh at my own jokes. So anyway, people always criticize me for that. So anyway, somehow the cows establish their hierarchy. And they follow the cow, at a certain time, and they become, a certain time of the day they go in this pasture, isn't it? They come to the next pasture, they're just like, they're in a group. So human beings also have that aspect of their psychology that they snap in because of propaganda. They snap into a particular mindset. And then it's actually described in the psychological literature. It's like a snapping. And just like I've talked to some people in Germany who are actually on the wrong side, but they're Nazis before. And I asked them, how did this happen? And they said, they don't know. They just snapped into this consciousness and they became bewildered. And they followed like blindly. So this is truthfulness, I mean, the diminishing of truthfulness in this age. And it's a really big problem. Really big problem. So this is getting to the point. This is the age of color. It's a bad scene. A really bad scene. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? You know, they have this, with weapons, it's the mutual assured destruction, you know, MAD is called, where both sides are going into weapons. There's so much conflicts between different groups of people, and labeling other groups of people, the lack of compassion. I mean, we really, as devotees, we should work on countering that. But this is this age. So Uddhava, getting back to the point, because I just talked about color, Uddhava actually asked Krishna, how do we get detached from this world, you know? And of course, that's a hard one. And ultimately, of course, one gets detached from this world by getting attached to something higher. There's like when your consciousness comes up, rises up, then you look down, and I'm using a distance analogy right now, and everything else shrinks. All right, let me use an example from my own life. When I was a child, I wanted to get detached from my mother when she was angry. So we were very fortunate that we had our own airplane. So when I would go up in the airplane, I would shrink my mother. You know, shrink your mother. You know, there was a movie once, Who Shrank the Kids? So, because you go up in an airplane, and then your mother gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and her anger becomes completely inconsequential. So ultimately, that's the point. We raise our consciousness higher and higher, and we're absorbed into something much more attractive. And then the things of this world, even things that are, you know, painful things, well, you know, that's a big reason for being detached from things of the world, because this world has a lot of pain in the way people treat each other. You know, there's pain from other living entities. We have this adhyatmik adhibodhi adhitaya, these are Sanskrit words. But pain from other living entities, pain from material energy, and pains basically from our own body and mind. The threefold miseries. And sometimes the pain lets off and we think, so great. Like today, walking down here, it's not too cold, well, not too hot. And I was thinking, wow, this is so great being here in the forest. And then a spider lands on me. I said, oh, you know what are these big spiders? One time I was in Brazil, and I was in the shower. It was actually a fan, South America. In the shower, there's a spider, literally this big, in the shower. And I just ran out, didn't bother to put my clothes on or anything, obviously. So, it's like that, you know, you're enjoying it, and then all of a sudden the weather gets bad, or love turns to hate, hate turns to love. It's like a sine wave. When you study electricity, it's a sine wave goes up and down, up and down, up and down, And sometimes you relate. Lord Chaitanya gives the example of the dunking stool, right? The dunking stool is an old punishment they used to use in the United States and in India, where they take a criminal, put them underwater until they were practically dead. And then they raise them up, and as soon as they could breathe, the breath, or taking a breath, became an ecstatic experience. Isn't it? Now you try that sometime. No, don't try it. But, just like, wow, I can breathe. Wow, this is the best life I've ever had, I can breathe. So as soon as the material energy lets up, and it's it's not too hot, not too cold, blissful. So, but when one becomes detached, one can always be blissful because I think the external things that go bad or good don't bother you anymore because You're not on a roller coaster. You know, roller coasters up and down, up and down, up and down. But it's just like everything's stable. Wow. Every day is good, you know. How are you doing? I'm great. Well, you're going to die. You know, you got this deadly disease. I'm great. It's like one of my godbrothers passed away recently. And, never mentioned his name. We mentioned him on internet class the other day. Never mentioned his name. But, so anyway, so he passed away and he was smiling. Amazing. He was smiling. He was smiling, he was happy, you know, just like going on a trip. You know, normally, you know, when they talk about people passing away, there's this whole thing you have to go through, you know. You get angry, you get denial, everything like that. But it wasn't any of those different stages. He just, goodbye. See you later. It was nothing like that, you know, back to God, you know. That's amazing. That's neutrality. I mean, that's really nice because then you're not influenced or deterred by any of these dualistic things that occur in this world. So that's why really we'd like to achieve this neutrality, because you're absorbing something better. It's not that you're just neutral. It's not that you're just like Om Shanti. Like sometimes in the Hindu temples, it's like Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And Shanti means peace. Peace be with you. Like we used to do in the, remember? You know, in the old days?
Peace and love.
Peace and love, you know. All you need is love. All you ever need is love. Anyway, so. Good old days. Always think about the good old days, but, you know, it wasn't that good. So, yeah, that's called false memory syndrome. Where you actually think about something and it didn't actually happen like that. So anyway, so that's the advantage of being neutral. Okay, so let's get on with the class so I don't go forever because there's only a few minutes left. And you're going to said this Prashant served that one, but so you have to listen. So anyway, so Krishna is asked that question by Uddhava. And Krishna answers that intelligence can be utilized, if you use logic and you observe this world. Even forget about Shastra, you know, the books or anything like that, or philosophy. If you just observe this world, you'll understand a lot of things about detachment. They teach you a lot of things. And these things can also be considered like spiritual masters, you know, teachers. I mean, like we're going to hear how you can learn from a bird, you can learn from a prostitute, you can learn from a mountain, all these different things. That was pretty cool, this whole story of Bhagavatam. It's like a wonderful story. So this story is based, Krishna's relating the story or a conversation between King Yadu and an Avadhuta Brahmin. And King Yadu asked the question, you're so detached and you're so expert, but you didn't do any religious thing. I mean, you never went to the Hare Krishna temple. No, I'm happy you're here. Don't worry. I don't want you to do what this guy did. And this King Yadu was saying, you're intelligent, you're handsome, and you're just by yourself and you're happy. And he answers that I use my intelligence to take shelter of many spiritual masters. In other words, many experiences, observation. Observation is very important. Because like I said, generally, we tend to follow the leader. We just like, people tell us things and we believe and we follow blindly. Prabhupada said in the Bhagavad Gita, blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. So devotees should use his intelligence rather than be subject to what we call cognitive dissonance. That's a big thing that occurs because of lying propaganda. Cognitive dissonance means that you actually don't believe what you see because your belief structure is so strong, or you're bought into some like philosophy, or you're bought into something that you're denying reality. You have your own reality. That's cognitive dissonance. It's a mental disease. And it's actually interesting that many times, I mean, just like I said, I do research. Many times people are religious, and it's not what's going on here necessarily, just in general, religious people tend to be subject to cognitive dissonance. I mean, like, you have something before. One example is the world is only 5,000 years old, because it says so, because people have extracted that from the Bible. And so they think, only 5,000 years ago the world was created. And, all the evidence points to the opposite. But that evidence doesn't, whatever. And even scientists are subject to cognitive dissonance. For example, when they have evidence that life existed, or human life existed, far in the past, very much more further in the past than there is belief structure, they deny that evidence. It's called a knowledge filter. Actually, yes, just like in the book, The Hidden History of the Human Race, right? You read that? He talks about the knowledge filter that archaeologists and anthropologists use. When they look at something, if it doesn't fit their belief structure, they reject it. You find a human being in a strata, human bones in the strata that shows there were human beings 5 million years ago, whatever it is, I'm not quoting exactly. And then you say, it doesn't exist. Something that defies your belief structure. So that's an important point. So one should be independently thoughtful, be able to observe this world. And so this particular Abhidutta, the word Abhidutta actually means like the wind. Someone just free. So he had 24 spiritual masters. And we're going to mention some of them because otherwise we go on for longer. The earth, mountain, tree, air, sky, water, fire, moon, sun, pigeon, a python, a sea, moth, a honeybee, an elephant, a honey thief, deer, fish, prostitute, Purari bird, child, young girl, arrow maker, serpent, spider, and wasp. Now imagine putting all those pictures of those gurus on your altar. That would be pretty interesting. So let's start with a few of them. Because that's the point. By observing nature, you can learn so much. So the earth, what he learned from the earth, and how he applied it. Because learning is one thing, and application is another thing. It's easy to learn. Learning is called jnana, and application is called vijnana, or realized knowledge. He learned from the earth that even if you're being harassed by other living entities, you should tolerate and not be distracted from your path of self-realization. I mean, in this material world, people have this concept of friends and enemies. Not that we shouldn't have that. Lord Kapila, in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, he says, Ajata Shatra Shanta, that's Sanskrit for it, that a spiritualist doesn't have any enemies. His enemy is never born. Yudhisthira Maharaj is also called Ajata Shatra for that particular purpose. So, but people will consider you or me to be their enemy, and they'll attack either verbally or whatever, in other ways like that. I mean, it's not that I say you just let them attack, you should defend yourself, obviously. But don't allow yourself to be distracted from your real purpose in life. So the earth is actually tolerating all these things and remaining steady. Of course, nowadays, the earth is rebelling a little bit. If any of you have heard the Gaia hypothesis, which means basically And the Earth's immune system is acting against us. Anyway, that's another subject matter. But from the Earth, you see the Earth just tolerates all these things. You can dig up the Earth. I mean, just like here in New Taliban, you're digging sometimes, you have a bulldozer out there.
Mhm.
And did the Earth ever complain about it?
Like you said, there tolerates, but it especially tolerates when we're digging to build a temple for Krishna,
Yeah.
beloved master.
Yeah, we say, if you're doing something for the benefit of the Earth, and the benefit of spirituality, and the benefit of Bhumi's master, then the Earth likes it. Then it's not a burden anymore.
Right, burden of love.
It's like, the mother takes care of a kid or many kids, and it's a burden of love.
Mhm.
But if it's not a burden of love, it takes a lot of toleration.
Mhm.
So anyway, and then he saw a mountain, and he saw that a mountain also is very tolerant and also devotes efforts to serve others. Many things come out of mountains, streams and things like that. And he learned that the welfare of others should be the reason for one's existence. Really interesting.
Hmm.
The welfare of others should be the reason for one's existence. Of course, one has to understand what the welfare of others means. Like, if you don't understand it and you act, be kind to someone, you may kill someone. Like Prabhupada gave the example of the young boy who gave his brother some fried food when the brother had a liver disease or something like that. And he hurt his brother. So he had good intentions. What did they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the good intention is not enough. You really have to know how to dedicate yourself. And the tree is also very similar to that. Like, you have so many nice trees. I was just walking through the fields here and seeing the different fruit trees and just thinking, the tree is just standing there dedicated to others, yielding fruits and everything like that. It's a living entity. So we learn from the tree, and also tolerance. The tree is standing in the winter. You don't take the trees inside usually in the winter. I mean, sometimes if they're fruit trees and it's subject to the cold, you would take them inside. But generally, Lord Chaitanya actually talks about, isn't it? More tolerant than a tree. One should be what Trinata Visuni Chena Parodi Vasishana Varidana Manadena. Kirtaniya Sadamari. One should be more tolerant than the tree, ready to offer all respects to others. And this way you can actually chant the Lord's holy names. And then, here's a few more. He learned from the air, the wind, not to become entangled, even though you come in contact with so many things.
Mhm.
The air doesn't mix. It may carry aromas, but it doesn't mix with the aromas. Because we find in the Bhagavad Gita that if we don't follow this process, there's a verse, Karnam Guna Sangasha Savasa Janma Jonishu, that the cause of our entanglement is association with what? The gunas, the modes of nature. Everything in the material world is covered by the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Every activity, every type of food, every type of person, even times of the day. That's why I rise early in the morning. Why do I rise early in the morning? Because that's the mode of goodness time. And I go to sleep early because the evening is what?
Come on.
Time to get drunk. Ignorance and passion. And it's just like, the night is young still. It's like I do a lot of work at the universities, and the people start their parties at 12 midnight. And I get up in the morning and they're still going on. It's amazing. At our center in North Carolina State, the devotees, I don't say at the center, I have some place, but the devotees were telling me that people were jumping over the fences at 4 o'clock in the morning and passing urine all over their property. So there's a time of day with different modes of nature, different food. Krishna describes this in the Gita. He comes back, food is the mode of passion, food is the mode of ignorance, food is and the mode of goodness. So you really have to be careful of this association because it influences the consciousness. You listen to a certain type of music. You watch a certain type of movie. And your consciousness becomes affected because these modes of nature are like wet paint. Everything in this world is covered with this wet paint of the modes of nature. You touch wet paint, you get it on your hand. Isn't it? So that's what he learned from the air. The air goes everywhere but doesn't really become contaminated or doesn't mix with it. It may carry it a little bit, but doesn't mix with it. And it's very similar to the sky, the lesson he learned from the sky, because the sky is everywhere, obviously, sky meaning ether at this point, which is space. Space is everywhere, it doesn't mix with anything. And then, I'm going through it very quickly. Then he learned from water. What did he learn from water? That a saintly person is like pure water. It's like if you have pure water, it's really nice. And you have nice water here in the well. And, drinking in New Orleans, it was had a little stuff in it. But here, it's very pure, and it's gentle, beautiful. It's like beautiful speaking of a pure soul. And just seeing or touching, like if you think about running water here, if you have a stream coming down from a mountain or something like that, just it's so soothing to the heart, isn't it? I mean, it's like even you have like an artificial running thing here in the temple, and just listening to it, it just makes you peaceful. And so he compared that to how a person should speak, or a great soul should speak, a saintly person, how he should act. Not to, Krishna also talks about that too, austerities of the speech. Such a priyatam, and of course also anavega, not agitating, speaking sacha priyahitam. Sacha means speaking truthfully, but pleasingly and beneficially. Austerities of the speech. In other words, if you can't speak truthfully, pleasingly, and beneficially, according to Vedic literature, that's also there, then why speak at all? In other words, before you speak, you should think, is this going to be beneficial to the other persons or people? Is it beneficial? Is it truthful? Or am I misleading them? And am I speaking in a pleasing way? So he learned that from water. Because water is like that. It's very pleasing, it's beneficial, pure water. Pleasing and beneficial. And then from fire, he learned that a saintly person should be so pure that even if he comes in contact with something that's not pure, like fire, it can purify. Like fire can get rid of all sorts of germs or nowadays viruses. Fire, so it's purifying. It burns up all the contamination. So a saintly person should be like that. And also, he said, he explained that sometimes if you don't properly approach fire, you get burnt. So when you approach a saintly person, it has to be done with due respect. And another point about fire is sometimes concealed. Like if you have a saintly person, the spirituality may be concealed. And a saintly person can burn to ashes other people's karma or bad karma. That means he's not only antiseptic, he's aseptic. You understand? Aseptic means pure, but antiseptic means able to purify others. And he learned so many things from the fire. Now that I'm looking at my notes. That he also learned that Krishna is one, fire is one, and he manifests his presence in different living entities differently. Another thing he learns is that the flames of a fire flicker, and And one doesn't always see this. So it's like time that's imperceptible. In other words, time, you don't perceive time generally unless you happen to look at a picture of yourself 20 years ago. Isn't it? You know, if I look at myself now, where's time? But then if I go and I look at a picture of myself when I was a kid, you know, sometimes my disciples have these baby pictures of me. And there's a picture, you know, there's a picture of me like eating, and they say, oh, and I say, well, here's my first prasadam. So, it wasn't prasadam. So, it's really imperceptible. And then anyway, we're going to skip a few here because time is of the essence. He looked at the moon, how the moon goes through regular phases, but the moon actually always remains the same in spite of going through all these phases. And then let's talk about the pigeon. This is actually an interesting story. This is one of my favorite stories. In Sanskrit, the pigeon is called kapota. And the kapota, there were two pigeons. Kapota and kapoti. It means a male pigeon and a female pigeon. And they were married. Somehow other pigeons got married. I don't know how they did it. So anyway, and they had a very nice tree home, and they lived for many years in the tree home. And there were nice eggs and babies and chirping and everything like that. And they were very affectionate to their children. And one day, the father was away catching, I guess, worms, whatever they do. And there was a hunter, and he captured the little baby birds. And the mother got so upset, she rushed to save them, and guess what? She got captured too. And then finally the father comes back, and the father, somehow or other, in this particular story, the father is like a human being. Because he's thinking my dharma, artha, kama, and moksha is all finished. I mean, birds don't usually think like that. Dharma means like my religion is finished, my sense gratification is finished, my economic development is finished, and my liberation is finished. Anyway, this is the 4 goals of human life, material goals of human life. So then the father laments, everything's finished, and then he faints. He's up in the tree, he faints, and guess what happens to him? Gets captured. Prabhupada tells the story a little differently one time. Bhagavatam, I just related how the Bhagavatam tells the story, but Prabhupada tells the story in a very funny way. He said, the father saw what had happened, then he took sannyas. This was in a class. Prabhupada, you know, so Prabhupada had that liberty to tell stories a little bit differently than they were in the Bhagavatam. The father, you know, took him out for taking sannyas. Anyway. So, what do we learn from that? We really can't save anyone. We can facilitate and try to help people, but ultimately it's up to the individual. Everybody, ultimately, like Prabhupada gave the example of flying their own plane, right? Like when you first learn to fly a plane, you know, I just learned to fly a plane. And it's, you know, you have a teacher next to you. He teaches you. But when it comes down to the real test, guess what? You're solo up there. And there's no one to tell you how to land. Of course you got a radio, I understand that. But you gotta land yourself. You gotta take off yourself. You got, like Prabhupada said, you gotta fly your own plane. You know, certainly we want to help people. We want to facilitate, just like I see in my position as the spiritual whatever I am, that I facilitate people's spiritual growth. But I don't think I'm the boss or dragging people back to the spiritual world or anything like that. I just think that my position is to facilitate. And they have to choose to be Krishna conscious. You know, everybody has their own choice. You can't interfere in Krishna, neither does Krishna interfere with the free will of a living entity. So in the same way, we really can't save anyone. We can try to help them, to let them save themselves. And this also helps avoiding being codependent with people. You understand? That's a big thing, codependency, where you think, you know, I have to just, it's my fault. I have to do something different like that, but everybody has their own choice. It's a really important lesson from the Kapota, the pictures he learns here. So, let's see if we have, oh my God, we only have 4 more minutes.
So what about the prostitute?
All right, we want to hear that one. Okay. Let's get to that one. And I got a lot more. Okay. Her name was Pingala. That's a romantic name if I ever heard one. Pingala. Anyway, so Pingala, she had to do that because she had a lot of debts. And she was just very morose. And so she stood in the doorway and he was observing her. And all night long, and no customers. So after a while, she learned detachment from this material world. She actually sang a song. In the Bhagavatam, it talks about, she had a song, she said, gave up the service to Krishna. Because all of us are like that. We're trying to exploit this world. Let's take that as an analogy, a metaphor. We're trying to exploit this world. And, you know, we become subject and exploited by so many others. Like Prabhupada said, this is a world of what? Cheaters and cheated.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all like that, in one sense. And she became frustrated, but that frustration led to spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in this material world, you become frustrated, you don't get what you want, and it causes you, of course it's also called smarshana vairanga. Anyone's heard that expression before? That means renunciation of the crematorium. So sometimes things like that happen. So many people just get bitter, or they forget about it after some time. But these frustrating experiences bring us to the point where we question, and it can be an impetus for spiritual life, or it can be an impetus just to take up intoxication, or it can be an impetus to forget spiritual life, or you become angry. But in her particular case, she took that up as an impetus to become a great devotee of Krishna. And she sang a song. She said, I gave up service to Krishna, and I became attached to this material body and so-called lovers, and I understand this enjoyment is temporary, and I'm very fortunate that I've come to this realization. So, in other words, desire, this is very much akin to Buddhism, that, and Lord Buddha taught, the Four Noble Truths, material world is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. Give up the desire, and the suffering goes away. And the way you give up, of course, he taught you give up the desire by the Eightfold Path, right living, right thinking, etc., like that. So we also teach that if one has a higher happiness, a higher desire, then ultimately one becomes detached from this material world and becomes happy. And you're not in anxiety. This poor girl, she was in anxiety. And then when she gave it up, the anxiety went away. Because if you have unrealistic expectations, this is a really important point, about material life, you're going to be disappointed and subject to anxiety and distress. If I have one unrealistic expectation I have is that I will see other people die and I won't die. That's from the Mahabharata, right? Hani Hani Bhutani Gachanti Himalaya. What's the most wonderful thing? We see everybody else go. I think I'm going to attend all of your funerals. I'll get a chance. Everyone's funeral here, even you young people, I'll attend your funerals and bless and do the eulogy, and I'll go on with life. That's the expectation I have. No, not really, but anyway. But really, it's psychologically, if you think about it, we do have sort of an expectation like that. A honey boo. We see everybody else go to Yamaraj, right? And we think, not me. So anyway, so it's actually time. So the point is that I can go through the other ones, but the point is that we observe this material world, what's happening in this material world. We can learn so many things, how to act, expectations we should have, unrealistic expectations. You know, observe other people, and even without reading any books, we can have these realizations. But ultimately, we should come to taking up Christian knowledge what we read. We have a process for becoming detached, because simply thinking about detachment doesn't make it detached. You have to have a process, and the process is chanting in Krishna's name, becoming attached to the spiritual platform, and then ultimately becoming Kevalananda happy.
Mm.
So should we take questions, or
Yeah,
just say
no, we can
shut
take
down?
questions. No, we can take some questions.
Questions? Yes.
In Bhagavad Gita, it describes that Krishna can be realized through, as you said, observing the material energy.
Right.
The mountains are his bones, etc. Can you explain a little bit about that particular chapter?
Yes, I mean, obviously, this world, I mean, just talking about, let's relate to the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. This world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So you can actually understand the spiritual realm by looking at the reflection. Not only do you become detached from this reflection, but you would understand there must be something on the other side of the mirror.
Mm.
We're in a mirror now. You know, we're in a, to use scientific term, we're in a simulation right now. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the simulation hypothesis. And, you know, it's just like, of course, I hate to use that movie the millionth time I'm using that movie, The Matrix. Anyway, and we think we're eating something and enjoying, but there's actually something on the other side. It's actually direct, like direct perception with our spiritual senses rather than through the, like our perception in this world is very indirect. We got the soul, we got the subtle body, we got the gross body, which is like all the nerves and the blood, and the, let's say talk about sight right now, okay. So, I'm looking at you, okay, I'm looking at you. And a light beam hits, or a photon, whatever, goes through my lens, which has actually been replaced due to the miracle of modern science. You know, anyway, goes through this lens, goes through that lens, hits the back of the eye, and gets, somehow or other, it becomes an impulse that's transmitted through the optic nerve to the brain, actually reverse size of the brain. And then after that, it becomes transmitted somehow or other to the soul in the body, not to the soul, to the subtle body first, and then to the soul. So it's such an indirect perception. And because of illusion, I think that I'm touching this table. I think I'm clapping my hands. I mean, obviously, these two hands are clapping, but this is not me. Because it's so instantaneous, the transmission of information and the transmission of action. You know, this is called Samkhya, what I'm talking about right now. You know, the active senses and the perceptive senses. Because it's so instantaneous, we think it's us. You know, it's arranged perfectly. But there's something else on the other side. There's something else. And that's the reality. And so, of course, the Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter describes this world as an upside-down tree where the branches are down and the roots are up, and also there's branches going up too. Anyway, it's a little complicated to describe right now. So, okay, yes, Vijay Prabhu.
John Maharaj, great lecture. I think the Matrix is always a great analogy for explaining dual realities. But you started off the lecture really nice. Historically, you were talking about propaganda, and in this age of misinformation based on truthfulness and untruthfulness.
Yeah.
How can the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, who spiritual group or spiritual society around the world, how can we protect ourselves even though we're in the midst
Of this.
of this turmoil, this storm
Yes,
of
good
knowledge?
question.
What is our key? What is our secret?
I think it's probably better not to take positions on relative subject
Yeah.
matters.
Yes.
And I've learned my lesson.
No, that's an excellent statement. That's excellent.
Yeah, I think it's better not to take positions on relative subject matters because we don't know. And we could take our position on absolute subject matters.
Yeah.
The things that are in the body, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things in this world we're in favor of the equality of everyone. You know, there's verse, you know, we have verses that are really, you know, really open. Let's say, Yastu Sarvani Bhutani Atmane Vanapashati. So someone who sees Krishna in everyone's heart doesn't hate anyone who sees the true equality of all living entities. There's many verses. So we can take certain positions based on absolute knowledge. But when we take positions, and I've seen that, you know, because I've seen that I make the mistake of taking a position of relative knowledge. It bites me. So we have to be careful of taking positions because there's a lot of things going on there. We don't know. We can be right, we can be wrong, and it's, you know, it's just not, it's not our purview because I'm not omniscient. If I was omniscient, then I could take a position on every subject matter. But unfortunately, I'm not. More fortunate. If I was omniscient, I'd be God. You know? But good question. Yeah, relative subject matters, we should keep our noses out of. I mean, we could say, this is my opinion, but, you know, just state it clearly. It's opinion, rather than, it's a fact! I believe the moon is made of green cheese. You know, be nice to go there and have some nice cheese. But, you know, it's like that. You really don't know who to believe with these relative things. The absolute things, sure. We can say equality, we're in favor of equality, we're in favor of non-discrimination. You know, all these things are actually part of scientific spiritual knowledge. But, you know, I think we have to be really careful, you know, and not buy into, you know, the modern science so much, which says, you know, by modern science, we're going to conquer birth, death, disease, and old age. They're going to download me into a computer and keep me in your Ginter's office. That'd be interesting.
Hopefully you won't get hacked.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get hacked. Hopefully you don't turn me off. That's even worse than getting hacked. So, I think on that note, it's time for Prasadam, right? Thank you for your questions. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai. Thank you all online for joining us.
Thank you for visiting.